Hello and welcome to the ETF show, taped right here at the New York Stock Exchange. I'm your host, Kristen Myers, ETF editor in chief for Asset TV. Now, we are just days away from the Christmas holiday, and we decided to use today's show to take a look back at some of the biggest trends for 2025. So, joining me today, we have Christine Berg, head of America's Index for MSCI. Christine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted for the conversation today.
And I should also note that this is not going to be our first conversation. We will be bringing you back in the new year for a little bit more of a data dive into some of the trends that we saw in 2025, but also maybe a look as well at 2026. So I'm going to be really excited for that conversation. So for everyone watching, make sure you tune back into what we're going to call part two, I guess, of this conversation. So let's first start with what happened in 2025. This was a pretty interesting year in the market. Talk to me about some of, the defining trends and themes that we saw this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know where to begin, but maybe I'll just try to narrow it down to a couple. And I think stepping back, one of the defining themes of 2025 was that ETFs, I think, were used not just to capture returns or performance, but also for investors to navigate some of the structural changes that are going on in the market.
Right.
The markets have become even more fragmented. And so we saw that across regions, sectors, themes, and what have you. And I think the ETF and many times the indexes behind the ETFs really helped investors navigate those changes and those structural shifts in a very precise way, and also in a way that they could intentionally manage risk. So that is something that I would say is quite a significant theme. And then I think, on behalf of MSCI, very pleased to say that ex-US exposures certainly regain their relevance. Look, US listed ETFs and US equity exposures by far and away, remain very, very strong, delivered returns, and it was great for investors.
Right.
But to navigate some of those structural shifts, whether it's responding to geopolitics or valuation gaps, or some of the other, growth shifts that we're seeing, really the ex-US exposures helped investors do that. So when you look at, interestingly, when you look at MSCI's Emerging Markets Index, MSCI Europe, EFA, and a few other single countries, the performance for those ex-US indexes significantly outpaced on a year-to-date basis through November the U.S. exposures. Sometimes it was double digits, and then there's actually a few countries where their returns were 4 times larger than U.S. securities. So that would certainly be a standout theme that also
The year of
impacted
international,
the
I was
year of
hearing for
international.
2025.
Yeah, very exciting. I mean, I don't think any conversation about themes, would be complete without talking about AI. And AI, it's not a brand new theme, but it shifted the demand equation for ETFs. And I think when we looked at AI early on, it was just about, the chips and the hardware providers. But throughout the course of 2025 especially, there was a significant expansion, right, into those helping with the build out. So infrastructure, utilities, materials, energy. And what ETFs allowed investors to do, I think, was to both have concentration as well as diversification at the same time as the theme broadened out. And so that was, a great example of how ETFs were driving demand, but also served as tools for investors to kind of lean into AI, but also expand and diversify. And I think diversification was a big theme.
Yeah. Yes, that was a big question
Yep.
for this year in general, especially with so many folks really honing in and still concentrating quite a bit on some of those mega caps and some of those tech stocks. Okay, so I want to kind of maybe pop the hood a little bit on the ETF wrapper and like talk a little bit about 'cause MSCI is all about the indexes. So I want to talk now about custom indexes because a lot of these ETFs are built around these custom indexes. Huge growth and explosion, what we're seeing in that. What do you think is driving some of that recent growth for, wrapping these ETFs around these custom indexes? And what do you think that means for the products that are, being designed and now brought to the market?
Yeah. I think the growth of custom indexes, especially, in the ETF market, it just resembles, maturity, right? We have a long way to go, but the industry is maturing. And market beta, right? Market cap weighted beta products, they're well entrenched, widely available in the market. And I think differentiation is becoming more and more important,
Right.
but also an ability to express certain themes or include certain risk controls or income-oriented outcomes. These are things that can build upon those market cap indexes that are very well entrenched. So to build upon what's in the market and the ecosystem, to express those sorts of different risk controls as well as themes. And then I think importantly for the US especially, certain regulatory requirements related to diversity and concentration and the like. And so the custom index, which, through a lot of investment in infrastructure and technology, has become, a scalable solution. It brings efficiency, allows for some of these strategies to be transparent, rules-based, efficient in that particular wrapper. And I think as, we see the market continue to grow and themes especially, the custom index solution, it'll allow for faster innovation cycles with products. And that is without, sacrificing the rigor and the quality, again, because it's building on this foundation. So more to come.
So about themes, right? Um, you were talking about AI a second ago. How is that index? And you kind of were just touching on it just a little bit, but how are you seeing index construction really changing, really to increase some of that thematic exposure?
Um, and I think AI is a perfect example because AI is not only a theme being captured
Right. Yeah.
in indexes, but also it's enabling,
Right.
right?
Cool.
The
Yeah.
yes. So early days thematic ETFs. I mean, more often than not, they were structured in a way that they use screens or were focused on pure plays. And the world has certainly evolved, not just because of, technology, but the themes themselves. And I think AI is the great example. Well beyond, the chips and hardware providers to the infrastructure, even thinking through, the downstream, right? The downstream enablers and adopters of AI. And so tech oriented ETFs or themes, that may have been where things started, but now in finding ways to capture that entire value chain across, again, AI, using that as an example, is something that is now enabled through indexation. At MSCI, we have our Investment Strategy Explorer tool. Sounds super cool. Only the researchers get to use it right now. But what that does is it allows you to take natural language inputs, large language models, agents, and identify, right, an objective or a strategy, map that to companies, figure out their exposures, and now create an index that can do all those things. And it's not just static. So going back to AI, our team did some research in that area, and they ended up identifying about 230 companies linked to the AI value chain and ecosystem. So that allows for scale in an index and or in a product, in a way that we had not seen in the past and is not as narrow as just, a very specific index. So we're excited about that, not only what it could bring to AI themes, types of indexes, but beyond. And I think that'll lead to a lot of innovation in the next generation of indexes and themes.
Right. Okay. So we're talking about next generation because one of the things that you did not mention as one of the bigger trends or themes of 2025 is active ETFs. Even though we already know we've seen 2025 even more active ETFs than we saw in 2024. Every single year, everyone is so excited about active. How is MSCI really helping the next generation of these active ETFs that we keep seeing being brought to market?
Yeah. And I think active ETFs, I would say, are well beyond a theme.
Yeah, they're not a new trend or new theme anymore.
Yeah, and look, it's quite exciting. I think the records were probably broken this year in terms of count as well as volume, and certainly the capture of market share growth amongst active ETFs. Um, Over time, it's not just investment strategies and alpha that will drive success. Efficiency, the infrastructure, and everything, related to a successful product are going to be equally as important. And I do think that the investments that are being made across data, analytics, and other tools to help issuers, you know, behind the scenes will only allow for greater growth and bringing these additional strategies to market and options to investors. I think what the number roughly today in equity-oriented active ETFs is, let's say, a trillion, just to use some round numbers. That's going to grow, especially with the new dual share class.
Right.
And so we've been monitoring, we're having lots of conversations with clients. And I would say that when you look at that trillion in AUM, about 25% of that AUM is leveraging MSCI's indexes or tools or data in some way, shape, or form. So active asset managers and use of MSCI's tools has long been, entrenched in the industry. And so now we're finding new ways with clients, whether it's through strategy design, for example, leveraging our universes or classification systems like GIC sectors or other things in the actual strategy design process, to portfolio management. We're very well known for our risk tools, stress testing, the optimizer.
Right.
A lot of times with the active portfolios, the need to reduce the constituent count becomes very important, right, for implementation and scalability in the market. Tools like optimizers are very helpful there. And then finally, I would say the third way that we're helping our clients is through just general engagement and sales enablement. So whether it's AI insights that we can offer them through some of our tools, or our on-the-ground folks who are constantly educating market participants, we offer those sorts of tools to our clients to help enable them through the entire life cycle of their active products.
Well, I'm excited for our next conversation as well to dive even further into some of the data because you have so many numbers, even that we were able to kind of talk about briefly before. But thank you so much, Christine Berg, head of America's Index for MSCI. Thank you so much for tuning in to the ETF show at Asset TV.